All right. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us for our first Q&A session with Maryland gubernatorial candidates. My name is Hunter Craig. I'm the Deputy Director of the Maryland Student Coalition, and I will be the moderator for this evening's event. This session is being recorded and footage will be uploaded online, so those of you who do not wish to have your cameras on do not have to. And so for those of you watching at home or are joining and don't know who or what the MSC is, we're an education advocacy organization that pushes for proactive legislative efforts on the state and local level. Our group is composed of 100 secondary and post-secondary students hailing from 16 different Maryland counties. More information regarding our group can be found at the link tree in the description of this video. The purpose of these events is to provide students with an opportunity to ask candidates for Maryland governor their stances on various education and youth-related issues. Our topics will be focused on students' rights to free speech, diversity in curriculum, youth voter empowerment, addressing bullying and harassment, and the impacts COVID-19 has had on our school systems. Tonight, we are joined by former Obama administration official, Ashwani Jain. Mr. Jain, the mic is yours.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for this opportunity, and also just for the work you all are doing, because I think it's very needed now more than ever, which is probably one of the most cliche sentences you can say, but it's true. So yeah, I would love to just share a little bit about myself, why I'm running for governor, some of the policies that I'm proposing and focusing on, and then I would love to open it up and answer any and all questions. So for starters, my name is Ashwani Jain. I use he, him pronouns. I'm a 32-year-old son of immigrants who has been lucky enough to beat cancer and go from a Make-A-Wish kid to a Make-A-Wish ambassador. I've gone from a Title I elementary school to later earn 2 bachelor's and 1 master's degree. I've worked in the public, private, and nonprofit sectors, and I served in the Obama White House and also in 2 federal agencies. And since January of this year, I've been honored to be a candidate for Maryland governor. If elected next year, I would be the nation's first millennial governor. But while a voice like mine has never been in this position before, I am running for governor to make our politics genuinely and sincerely more inclusive and more accessible. Now, this idea of inclusion started back when I was 13 years old and diagnosed with a type of cancer. It was during that time that I saw a world in which I may not get to leave the 4 walls of that hospital room. I saw kids sitting right next to me lose their battles. I felt depressed and alone. And I also found many who were making decisions for me as opposed to making them with me. And so it was in that moment I thought, okay, if I'm blessed enough to get a second chance at life, I was going to try to make it count. And luckily, I not only beat cancer, but was really able to go from survivor to advocate. And by getting involved in politics, I actually found opportunities to connect with others who had similar struggles and also to channel my pain into something positive. And it's that advocacy work that has now led me to run for governor, because I not only understand how to create policy, but I also have the perspective and empathy to enforce those policies in a fair and equitable way. For almost 2 decades, I've worked on programs and policies that have benefited every community across this state. And as a product of Maryland public schools, as a son of immigrants and small business owners, and also as someone who has dealt with both physical and mental health issues, I know what it feels like to be written off or have others make decisions for me instead of with me. And that's also why I'm not waiting until the election to be inclusive. I've already built one of the largest grassroots campaigns in Maryland with over 340 active volunteers from every single county, high schoolers to retirees. And I'm also the first statewide candidate in the US to be 100% volunteer run. I crowdsource policy, and I limit the influence of money by making every single event I host free. I've also created mobile campaign offices in every single county, and I've shared over 60 detailed policies on my website, including my fully paid for Maryland Now plan, which is going to do 5 things. Eliminate your state income tax, make Maryland the very first state to make public transit free. It's going to create the nation's very first guaranteed jobs program. We're going to legalize marijuana and expunge records. And I'm going to impose anti-corruption measures. Because all of this, at the end of the day, I believe decisions about us should not be made without us. And so if you'd like to join us or learn more about anything I talked about or will discuss, you can go to janeforgovernor.com. But with that, I would love to answer any and all questions.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Mr. Jain. So the way that this event will run is very simple. Once we begin the Q&A, each attendee will have the chance to ask up to 3 questions, and we ask the candidate to respond to each of these questions within 1 to 3 minutes roughly, so we have enough time for everyone. We will start with questions from our senior associates and associates, and if time pertains, we'll open the floor for discussion on any topic. In order to ensure an orderly flow, I do ask all participants to please click the raise hand button in the lower right corner of your screen before turning on mics. This will prevent any interruption. So without further ado, let's get into the Q&A. So does anybody have any questions first? If not, I can call on one of the directors. All right, go ahead, Maya.
Sure. So this is kind of just a more general question to start off, but you mentioned that you have people of all ages involved in your volunteer run campaign, from high schoolers to retirees. I love that. And I was just kind of wondering, what has this provided you with any like perspectives, with like all your volunteers being of so like vastly different backgrounds and ages, like going into more intense campaigning, or possibly your plans for what you would do if elected?
Well, thank you. It's all the above, right? Luckily, I've already started with a ton of lived experiences and professional experiences that I think are really suited to the office of governor and the policies I'm proposing. But it really is true. I'm trying to make politics more inclusive and accessible. And I think a lot of times I hear candidates or politicians say, once I'm elected, then I'll include residents in the decision-making process. And most of the time, residents fail to get that seat at the table. And so I'm trying to prove that you can actually and should need to include people from day one of the campaign, because how you campaign is going to dictate how you're going to lead. And so everything is crowdsourced. We have volunteers creating policies, researching policies, creating strategies, making graphics and social media videos, all the above, all the things that you would typically use insiders for or a paid consultant. I'm trying to open up that process and not just say, I'm going to give you a seat at the table, but speak the truth to my words and literally give you a seat from day one of my operation, so that we not only run a campaign that's more grassroots and efficient, but we are making policies that are going to be more equitable and fair, and also better able to be accomplished in the long term, because we have the residents who are going to be impacted by those policies making those decisions.
Yeah, thank you so much.
So I have a quick question, Mr. Jain. So as you mentioned, you're a resident of, or you were a public school student in Montgomery County. I'd like to know if you were involved in any youth-related demonstrations or peaceful protests that really sparked some civic engagement from an early childhood standpoint.
Yeah, I mean, I think the first political, because I was involved in community service and groups like the Make-A-Wish Foundation and the American Cancer Society, just being a kid with cancer, advocating for certain, equitable measures in Congress. But I think my first real political entryway was on the Obama campaign. I was a senior in high school, had no political connections, but here was this guy who A, looked more like me than any other candidate at that time, and B, was empowering a nobody like me to help run his campaign, at least in my high school, and C, was speaking about affordable healthcare in a way that really resonated with me. And so not only did I organize students in my school in support of his campaign and his policies, but once he got elected and I went to college, I became his student director for the entire state of Maryland. And so as an undergrad student, organizing every other college and university in our state to get the Affordable Care Act actually passed. And then also the Maryland Dream Act passed in 2010. I think those were some of my first activism and kind of legislative efforts.
Very cool. And real quick, what was your specific position on the Obama campaign?
Yeah, so I worked for his organization for about 10 years. So I did move around and get promoted a couple of times. But, I was the student director for the state of Maryland for his grassroots organization called OFA, Organizing for America. Then I became one of his field directors for Montgomery County for his second presidential campaign. And then I got a chance to work in the administration, where I worked in a couple offices in the White House, one of which was the Office of Presidential Personnel. So really the office that found, recruited, appointed, and retained every political appointee in the federal government. And I was in charge of the diversity aspect. So making sure that the leadership reflected the diversity of our constituents. I also served as one of the directors of the Affordable Care Act at HHS, the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. I later served as one of the White House liaisons at the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. And then one of my final roles was actually working directly with then Vice President Biden as his director of outreach for what was called the Cancer Moonshot Initiative, which helped provide billions of dollars in additional funding to the NIH and the FDA, which are both housed in Maryland as well.
Wow, that's awesome. Lauren, go ahead.
Hi, yeah. So you mentioned that you had some interaction with the DREAM Act in your position on the Obama campaign. And so I guess I'm just wondering, what are your priorities as far as immigration in Maryland? And yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's a couple things, right? Number one is we have to start with increasing representation and again, making the process easy, even for people who are not English speakers as their first native language. That's why I am the first, and I may have this wrong, but I may be the only governor candidate to have my website translated into multiple languages and have captions on my videos and pretty much everything in between. It's a small gesture, but again, when you're talking about including people of immigrant descent or current immigrants into the process to help make policies, you got to make the process more transparent and easy. So it's things like that. Legislatively, it's not only continuing to support the DREAM Act, which was passed in 2010, but making community colleges a lot more affordable and accessible. They actually house and take care of more students than our four-year institutions, one of which that I went to, University of Maryland, but they don't have the same revenue streams. So making sure that we're helping more students get access to higher education, I think is super important. Also making sure that we're taking care of all of our public schools, especially in low-income neighborhoods, because those unfortunately happen to be majority minority residents as well, one of which I went to. I went to a Title I elementary school. And so, reprioritizing the funding, I think is super important. I first ran for office in 2018 for a local county council race in Montgomery County. And I was the first and I think only candidate to publicly state that I wanted to make Montgomery County a sanctuary county. Now, what that means as the governor's race is making sure we're limiting the influence of ICE and not deporting our residents and making sure that we take care of our residents in-house in the state first. So those are some issues. And then the final thing I'll mention is understanding that minority issues, immigrant issues, should not be looked at in silos. They are the same people who are affected by healthcare issues, affordable housing issues, criminal justice issues. And that's where if you look at any of the policies I've proposed, I do try to look at them in a comprehensive and sustainable way.
All right, Chris and then Chikamara.
Good evening, Mr. Jain. Thank you for answering our questions. My question is about kind of the administrative aspect of the governor's office. In the Maryland Student Coalition, we've run into a lot of the nitty gritty of policy and how a lot of that butts up against the role of the governor in implementation and things like fiscal and personnel aspects. So could you speak to a little bit about both your experience and also your ideas for really honing in on effective administration, in addition to some of those higher like policy ambitions, how you actually be an effective administrator for like existing programs and things like that?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think number one is how you set the tone, right? To make sure that administratively, organizationally, you are including residents and your constituents in every aspect of governing. It is not really necessarily a hot button issue, but it is true. And I think it's one of the many reasons why people feel disillusioned or disconnected with their politics in general, or why certain policies get passed and it doesn't really make sense, or they're not being addressed in a comprehensive or sustainable way. And so that's where, again, it goes back to how I'm running my campaign. That's number one. Number two is making sure we are governing in the same way we're campaigning, which is transparent, making sure that whatever we talk about, whatever policies we're proposing, we have full transparency in what exactly are we talking about, how are we going to pay for it, what are we going to do in the short term, and what are we going to do in the long term. And that, again, I have shared on my website since I kicked off in January. And then finally is looking at the appointees who are leading the agencies. Like I said, one of the jobs I had in the Obama White House was managing the political appointee process. And so finding the right people to fit those right jobs, whether you are a cabinet level secretary, a chief of staff, or a junior level special assistant, making sure you understood the mission of not only what, in that case, the president was advocating for, but what those agencies were intended to accomplish. But also that when you're appointing candidates and looking at candidates for those top positions, at least half needed to reflect diverse communities. And so I was part of a small team that helped get more women, people of color, people from the disability community, veteran community, and LGBTQ community into those leadership roles. And so naturally, if I'm elected governor and I would be creating my own administration, it is understanding how to work with the career civil servants already in our state government, but then also making sure that the leaders of these agencies and departments truly have similar lived experiences and the perspective, so that whenever we're talking about the budget or we're talking about any of the policies that I've been advocating for, they are done in a really sustainable and sincere and genuine way.
Thank you.
Hi, I just had a quick question. So you mentioned that you were the student director of the OFA for the Obama administration, and I was just wondering how that impacted how you believe student voices should be heard in these major discussions.
I mean, it impacted me greatly because it not necessarily taught me the importance of the youth voice or the community voice, because I am a youth, I was a youth, I was in the community, so I knew that my voice needed to be heard. But it showed me that the higher ups can get it done and can include our voices if you have the right people in place. And I think what that means now is I have seen so many times a disconnect with what candidates and politicians say and do, right? Because whenever young people, people of color take lead on issues, and I hear this all the time, they will discourage us with phrases like, wait your turn, you're too young, you're too ambitious, you don't have enough experience. But then at the same time, tell us how qualified and important we are when it comes to getting them elected. Many also ask many of their volunteers to dedicate dozens of hours a week to get them elected, but then shy away from giving them a real seat at the table when it comes to making policy or strategy decisions. And so it's understanding that reality, also seeing that we were able to bridge some of those gaps in my Obama days. And now with my campaign for governor, I'm trying to take it a step further by including more voices and really crowdsourcing the entire operation. I think, which has stayed true to me and which is what I'm hoping to continue on, not only throughout the course of this campaign, but obviously if I have the honor of being elected.
All right, John.
Good evening, Mr. Jain. Thank you so much for coming to speak with us. So on a similar subject matter, there's numerous opportunities across the state already where students can get involved in either advisory roles or even policymaking roles. One of the key ones in regards to the governor's office is the Maryland Youth Advisory Council. And there's been numerous other ones, including like the Maryland Association of Student Councils, which works to try and advocate for legislation and stuff like that. For these roles, many of the students that take leadership on them and make recommendations to the governor's office feel as if those recommendations are not truly getting like received and actually interpreted and then enacted. And there's little to no response from the governor's office on how these recommendations or actions can be actually responded to. What actions, if you were to become governor, would specifically be taken to prioritize student voice in these roles, and what actions can be taken to diversify these already established positions?
The shortest and quickest answer I can give you is I've already created the template on my campaign in a historic way that's never been done before from a statewide operation campaign-wise. I'm not just creating these councils, making you feel the facade of, oh yeah, I'm going to hear your voice, and then you don't ever hear back, or those don't get translated into actual policies. Look at how I'm running my campaign. literally everything on my campaign is crowdsourced. So I'm not just saying, hey, your voice is important. Some of my policy proposals have actually been created by high schoolers, by college students. Some of the strategy decisions I'm making have been literally created by high school students, by college students, in addition to, you know, everyone who's older as well. But it really is looking at everyone in an equal way. And so I'm not going to tell you, yeah, I'm going to wait until the election, and then once I'm elected, I'm going to create this council and that council. I'm showing you right now, tangibly, everything that I'm doing in my campaign. And the reason why we have more volunteers than any other governor campaign in this race is because I am literally speaking truth to power, giving you a genuine seat at the roll, not forcing a time commitment on you, and literally personalizing the volunteer experience for all of our team members. So if someone really is interested on just housing stuff, okay, we're going to help them lead the housing conversations that I'm leading. If you are just interested in climate change, we're going to have you literally build our climate change policy proposals. If you're just interested in field and operations, okay, you're going to help strategize and figure out what are the next moves I'm going to make. All the normal responsibilities that are given to paid staff or consultants or political insiders, I've opened that up. And I think that is the most genuine and sincere answer that I can give, is I'm trying to make that true from day one of my campaign. And the last thing I'll say is, in terms of specifically the youth voice, I am going to be if elected, I would be the youngest governor in America. I would be the first millennial governor. So this is not just a talking point for me. This is my voice as well. And so I genuinely understand and feel what it's like to be written off, discounted, or not being taken seriously. And again, this goes beyond young voices as well, right? This is people in rural communities, communities of color, people from the disability community, LGBTQ communities. People who are disadvantaged historically and systemically go through the same issues, and they do not feel like their voices are being heard or heard seriously. And I'm trying to show that, at least on my campaign and whatever I have control with, I'm going to change the narrative.
Yeah, I can say that just me personally, I've experienced some of those same, talking points of that, oh, you're too young, take a step back, and wait. Yeah, absolutely. So a few questions back, you mentioned wanting to fill government positions with effective leaders and essential constituents and stakeholders. So my question is, what do you look for in a state board of education member, as that would be a role, that would be a position, a board that you would be tasked to fill?
I look at a few things, right? One is, are you racially or geographically representing the constituents that we're going to be serving? Do you come from those same communities? Because I think why that's important is it shows you have similar lived experiences. As a quick example, and this touches to your question, when I talk about all my education reform policies, I come at it from the perspective of a public school grad, a Maryland public school grad, and someone who went to a Title I elementary school in one of the wealthiest counties in the nation. And so naturally, when I'm making policies, I'm not going to forget about that. And it's going to help make my policies more inclusive and more sustainable because I have been at the tail end of some of those issues. And so with any appointee that I have, whether it's a board and commission or whether it's superintendent or anything else, it is looking at people who have similar lived experiences, have those shared values, and also have some experience getting it done, or at least advocating for those issues.
Thank you. And then, all right, you are good to go, John. Did anybody else have any other questions? We're coming closer down to the time. But Lauren, Maya, Chikamara, Afnan, did you all have any questions?
Just a quick question. I know you said that you're going to be the first millennial governor. If elected, what would be your measure to kind of encourage others to follow your footsteps?
Well, I think what I'm trying to do on my campaign is not wait until the election. And so if people have never campaigned before and want a high level experience on a governor's race, on how do you prepare for a debate, how do you research policies, how do you determine what to do next, I'm hoping, I'm training a bunch of folks and helping them understand and see what it's like behind the scenes. And then if you already have a ton of experience, then you can add to those skills by getting tangible hands-on experience on my campaign. So that the way I'm answering your question is by saying, I don't like to just say the empty rhetoric. I really genuinely like to focus on real actions and practical solutions. And so the best thing that I can say is I'm not just going to wait until the election to start including more voices and getting more young people involved. I'm doing it from day one. And I think that is something that is always lacking in many campaigns that I've seen. They always say, once I'm elected, I'll do this. Once I'm elected, I'll do that. Okay, well, what about the first year and a half that you're campaigning? Why can you not model how you're going to govern in terms of your actual operation? Did that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
All right, so I had one last question, and this relates to the COVID-19 pandemic. So as you know, COVID-19 has sent rippling effects across the state and across our school systems that are going to have long-lasting effects. We're currently looking at COVID recovery plans. Various jurisdictions are reviewing what those will look like in the next 10 years, as missing, a whole year of education in person does a lot on a student's both mental health well-being as well as their education. So my question is, for the communities that were disproportionately hit from COVID, including rural areas and the inner cities, for those communities as well as special education students, do you have any specific plan to speed up their recovery process over the next 4 to 8 years if you are elected governor?
I think it's not looking at issues in piecemeal. You have to look at the totality of this issue and all the issues if you're going to bring meaningful change, especially to those communities. And so that means, practically speaking, having mask mandates and vaccine mandates. We already have it in other cases. I think that's the best, safest way to get people back in the classroom and kind of out of whatever their mental challenges they're going through. And I went through my own mental challenges this past year, just like I know a lot of us did. So I think it's having those. I think it's doing an audit of all of our hospitals to ask them what worked well, what didn't work well, so that we can prepare for, whatever future may come up, because we can't predict, if and when there's going to be another pandemic, but we have to be prepared. We also have to make sure that we're not always quick to open up before we look at the science and before we actually take those steps to make sure teachers and educators have protective equipment, that students have what they need as well. And then also part of that is making sure everyone has access to good Wi-Fi and broadband services, so that if we are in a situation where we have to do virtual learning, at the very least, we're not going to just disregard certain communities because they don't have access to internet. So again, I feel like I'm jumping around a little bit, but it is genuinely looking at all of these issues at the same time. Otherwise, we're just putting a Band-Aid on a problem that will keep reoccurring even after COVID is gone.
All right, thank you for that. And thank you everyone for the great questions and engaging dialogue this evening. And of course, thank you, Mr. Jain, for taking the time to meet with us. Do you have any final comments before the session ends?
Yeah, I just want to say again, thank you for this opportunity and the work you all do. I genuinely meant every word that I said in terms of making the process more inclusive and accessible. And so if you want to hold me accountable and learn more about any of the other issues we spoke about or did not speak about, go to my website, jainforgovernor.com. I'm also happy to meet one-on-one with any single person who wants to have that conversation, dive deeper on issues. You can also find that on my website. And then the final piece is, if you want to be a volunteer leader on my team with no time commitment, we'd also love to have you. So again, all that information can be found at jainforgovernor.com.
Fantastic. Thank you for that. Thanks again, everyone. Our next event is scheduled for October 15th at 5:00 p.m. with former Maryland Attorney General Doug Gansler. More information on that event will be sent out soon. And anyone who's interested in attending that event or other future events should fill out the registration form found in our link tree. So that's a wrap. Good night, everyone. Thanks again. And I hope you all had a good time.
Thank you all so much. I appreciate it.